the line from the first reading where God promises that the priests will have their fill of fatness. That's very much how I felt after I got home from Christmas events. As many of you know, probably most of you know, after last Sunday, my family and I, we jetted out and we went to Missouri for a week, spend it with family and grandparents. Well, while we were in Missouri, we were also able to see some of the kids who used to be in the youth group that I led at this Evangelical Reformed church in St. Louis, the one I used to work for. It seems like a lifetime ago. Well, these kids, they're not kids anymore. When we left St. Louis, they were high school students. They're definitely not that anymore. A lot of time has passed. And they're adults now. Wonderful, wonderful adults. And originally the plan was just to see one of them. But then this person invited a few more that she had heard about being in town and kind of surprised some of these people that we were also in town. And so there was a small group of these old youth group kids that got together with us. But as we sat down for lunch, something strange started happening to me, and I had a hard time putting my finger on it until actually after we left. I suddenly found myself getting short of breath. I suddenly found myself getting really defensive. Mentally, I was putting walls up. And I found that simply sitting there with them, it was an emotionally exhausting experience for me. It had nothing to do with them. They were wonderful. But I left that lunch just utterly drained. And I found that while they were reminiscing about some of the great times they had in youth group while we were there, all I could think about was the tidal wave of terrible memories that I had from that church. And they were remembering things that I had said and did that left an impact on them, things I don't even remember because I've spent the last several years of my life repressing that time. I was once a youth pastor to all of these lovely people, but it was in one of the most toxic churches and traditions I had ever known. And little did any of these former youths know that while I was seeking to minister to them and love them the very best that I could, while I was still with them during those years, some of their parents and many of the adults who sat next to them in the pews Sunday after Sunday severely wounded me. And they made me feel like I was never good enough. They always made me feel like I was doing something wrong. The church hired me to help them connect with more young people than they were connecting with at the time, but 99% of my ideas were slapped down just as soon as I mentioned them. And by the end, I just quit suggesting new ideas altogether, but of course I got blamed publicly and shamed for not coming up with any new ideas whenever I decided to do that. Many of the people from this church were some of the worst people I had ever met. And indeed, a few of them were a couple of the worst people I have ever known. You know, I walked around with a tightness, literally, I walked around with a tightness in my chest for the entire 7 years that I was there. I was so angry this last week at lunch because these kids from this youth group, they never hurt me. They were wonderful kids. But simply by being around just a few of them, I was transported right back through to that place of pain and heartache and anxiety and depression and shame. I felt like I was back in that toxic church all over again. My friends, I've been with you for a few years now. I went to seminary for 3 years before you. I left that church 5 years ago. But apparently I'm still being triggered by the very memory of it. This is how deeply the modern church wounds people. I'm going to say it even more specific than this, actually. This is how deeply evangelicalism wounds people. This is how deeply the Christian right is wounding people. And for years now, I've felt convicted of something, but I've been just too afraid to say it publicly. But I'm tired of mincing words. I can no longer tell the difference between evangelical Christianity and a cult. Evangelicalism is the great heresy. of our day. And evangelicalism, for sure, is the Herod of our times. Like the Holy Family in our story, and the other gospel stories that talk about this, we talk about this Sunday, countless people feel safer fleeing into the great pagan unknown of Egypt than they do at the thought of sticking around in the Holy Land that they were brought up in. At least in Egypt, they know that they have a chance of survival. But if they stay in Israel, they know that Herod will eventually destroy them. Because Herod cares more about his own power than the people that he serves, is supposed to serve at least. And evangelicalism is no different than Herod, and that it's more about maintaining its cultural power than it is helping people. In all these stories, Herod was willing to murder babies and toddlers just to keep his power intact. So much of the modern church likewise has sacrificed millions of people on the altar of their power. LGBT plus people, people of color, women, and most of all, young people. I mean, when the day finally came, and I announced that I was quitting in St. Louis, I told the board of elders of this little evangelical church I was leaving them. And I also called them out on their hypocrisy and their toxicity, naming my own perfections in the process. I'd finally said the things that I wanted to say, things that needed to be said. And I told them that I was leaving their tradition because they proved to me just how unchristlike it was. But by the end of the discussion, the senior pastor, he asked me not to tell my true reasons for leaving the church to anybody else. He wanted to save face for the all-male board of elders. He didn't want anybody questioning their authority. My only regret from that time is that I listened to him. I should have gotten up that next Sunday and just told everybody to run like hell. That's what I should have done. But by that point in my life, I didn't have any fight left in me. I was completely burned out. That church had robbed me of all of my vitality. Evangelicalism, it listens more to its own pride than it does to the young people who are leaving it in droves. Now, you might be thinking, this is kind of a downer. Why is he going on and on about this? We aren't evangelicals. Many people have also gladly left the evangelical tradition years ago and have never looked back. So you might be wondering, why is he drawing a line in the sand right now between us and evangelicals? Are we all one? The answer, my friends, is no. No, we're not. We're not one. Evangelical Christianity drew a line in the sand decades ago between us and it, and simply pretending like that line does not exist, that's not doing anybody any good, including us. I mean, I have evangelical family members and friends who quit talking to me the day that this thing was placed around my neck. They pushed me to the other side of that line in the sand. I also bring all of this up because whether we like it or not, evangelicalism affects us here. It is still a behemoth in our country. It still holds a lot of cultural sway. So much so that many people believe that their modern day Herods are the best, most godly men who have ever led our country. They've had the wool pulled over their eyes. Most importantly, many people like me, countless people like me in our country and in this city, are still getting triggered at the very thought of their time in the evangelical churches they grew up in. Still, years later, they're finding that they have not fully healed yet, that old scars are still being opened back up into wounds again. And because the Christian right is more outspoken than we Episcopalians are, many people don't know how different we actually are. Many don't even know that we exist, period. I remember having a conversation years ago, I think it was the first year I was in seminary, with an old childhood friend. We reconnected briefly. She said that she used to go to church, but no longer does so because she believes that women and gay people should be allowed to be ordained. And I was like, hello, have you heard of the Episcopal Church? Do you want to know what her response was to me? The what church? She had no clue that churches like us, traditions like ours, are out there. She did not realize that some flavors of Christianity differed dramatically from the Christianity that she grew up in and felt so ashamed in. She did not realize that there are still some of us Christians out there who are definitely trying not to be like Herod, right? Some of us are not willing to sacrifice people in order to maintain our position of cultural power. And that's probably the exact reason why people like her haven't heard of people like us. We're actually trying to be, humble, right? We're not making cultural power grabs. But even so, there are going to be many, many, many people outside of these stained glass walls who will be reluctant when it comes to coming into this space and experiencing what we are all about because they fear that the past just might repeat itself with us. They fear that they might get hurt by us like they've been hurt by other church people in the past. Is it fair to you that they feel this way? Is it fair to me that we're getting associated with these traumatizing churches? It's not, my friends. It's not fair. Because you are wonderful people. This job, I want you to know something. This job is hard. It is heavy, more so than most people realize. But it's not the burden that my previous church was. You all are a joy to be with. I don't walk around this place with a tightness in my chest like I did all of that time in St. Louis. You are a wonderful, wonderful community. But here's the thing. This is the cultural reality that we are facing, even as Episcopalians. We're getting lumped together with other Christians who have hurt people. And this is the hurdle that we must somehow find a way of overcoming if we're going to experience some growth in this space. Now, to be certain, there will come a time when Herod will finally die off. I am confident of that one. A time when the Savior will be able to return to the Holy Land once again. If you get my drift. There'll be a time when false religion, when heretical religion, when the cult of right-wing evangelicalism will die off. And true religion will return and flourish once again. But until then, we must know the time we're living in. We're living in a time of Herod's desperate wrath. So as a church, I would like to suggest that we make a New Year's resolution. And let it be this. Let's do all that we can to ensure that this place, that this parish, is a safe place for all people to flee to. In the age of Herod, let's do all that we can to turn this place into the sanctuary of Egypt. And let us not be fearful of calling Herod and all of his followers out for their BS, right? Yeah. I think the temptation for us is just to stay quiet for the name of keeping the peace. This is not a time of peace. There is no peace, right? Don't say peace, peace when there is no peace. People are really getting hurt, really injured. And I cannot keep count of how many people have left the church wounded and scarred throughout the course of my lifetime, right? It's a time for us to speak up. It's a time for us to be a safe refuge, as best we can. We're not going to be perfect. We never will be. We'll make mistakes. We'll say hurtful things from time to time, but we must seek to be a safe refuge for people, for all people. Does that make sense?